there.
Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. Okay. I'm Patti Ruiz-Healy, Associate Director of Ruiz-Healy Art. Thank you for joining us today. I'm joined here with Jennifer Ling Datchuk, who was born in Warren, Ohio, and grew up between Ohio and New York City. She has lived and worked in San Antonio for a couple of years now, has a MFA from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and a BFA from Kent State University. Most recently, she was named one of the 2020 United States Artist Fellows, an honor that comes accompanied by an unrestricted $50,000 grant. Huge deal. Congratulations, Jennifer.
Thank you for telling everyone I have a little bit of money right now.
It was online, so the jig was up. So I guess we'll just get started with something a little general. What does being an artist right now during this time of, you know, a big election coming up, a pandemic, a lot of cultural shifts, what does it mean to be an artist right now? I mean, do you feel any sort of responsibility? What does it really mean to you right now?
I think these are all like big questions artists are asking themselves, and even like people within their communities that we're asking, and all trying to figure out what can we do. So one thing, like as an artist, I'm really appreciative of in some ways like these Zoom conversations, and that I can talk to people that I can't readily see. So hello, new friends and old friends. Thank you for joining us. I think as an artist now, you know, when this pandemic first happened, like at the end of March, which feels like a lifetime ago, I kind of welcome the idea of like having this time to pause and like make work in my studio, and like kind of this forced isolation to like hunker down and be creative. But I wasn't expecting like the emotional hit and the mental energy it takes just to like get through day to day, and that really recognizing that everyone has different struggles within this process, and that because of this, like there are a lot of inequalities seen. And I even question like, what's the purpose of art at this time? Like, what does that mean when also this whole system of how art is shown and survives is like been kind of leveled? And I think I'm still struggling with the idea of like what to make work about, and that even with the conversations with my friends of how we don't want to make work about COVID, but I think a lot of us do make work about the social injustices, the inequalities, and the current political climate that we live and navigate in. So I kind of went back and looked at my work within the past few years and how a lot of things I was talking about haven't changed. It hasn't moved. Maybe, if anything, the conversations are louder, but I'm still waiting to see something happen.
So, I mean, that kind of brings us to another point. A lot of your work deals with identity, how you identify with your identity or maybe reject your identities, and women's rights, women's issues, women's voices. What past experiences kind of led you down that path of exploring that in your work, and how has, you know, even most recently AOC's speech to the congressman affected your current work or your outlook, you know, even on social media, your independent research? Because I know a lot of, you know, you do a lot of research going into your work. You're very well researched first. How has that affected? Yeah.
So my work has always been about how I've come to question, or how I talk about identity as someone who is biracial, of growing up the daughter of an immigrant, of being half Chinese, half white, and what it means to be American. I think these were all things I was kind of questioning when I was in school. I went to school to be a doctor, and then I changed it to pre-law because I did what like every good Asian daughter should do, is study those two things. But it was when I came to art that I realized I didn't see things so black and white anymore. And that was a way for me to express like emotionally how I was feeling. But during that time when I was like a young art student, I didn't see stories or works that reflected my experiences. And that living in the threshold of being half is something that is a really unique experience where we almost exist within this idea of a third culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think how I've come to kind of that in my practice now is when we look at the world today and we see these stories, we see what's going on in the news, like when you're half, you don't know what you're allowed to speak up on, what you're allowed to feel, are you placed. I mean, if we look at even the census, like I didn't know what box to check. So,
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah. For me, it was, yeah, because I mean, I'm the daughter of two Mexicans raised in the States. You know, the boxes are confusing. It's like, is there an other? Can I write in my own maybe? Like,
and even when you choose other, you feel like you're not acknowledging the two sides that you come from. And I think these are all like conversations I have so much with my students because they are, I have this conversation all the time where we look one way, but we maybe don't speak the language fluently, or we don't know everything about the food that our culture eats.
music.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that has always informed my sense of identity. And then just being a woman, of someone who just turned 40, of understanding kind of the misogyny and patriarchy that I've had to navigate, like being an art student, being a grad student, of trying to get a full-time teaching job, or even like you know, in my 20s, I worked in a restaurant and seeing like within that, like those experiences of women of speaking up in these situations too, and just being told, oh, it's just a crush, or, you know, he didn't mean it. And
Don't take it so seriously.
yes. And like when you're in your early 20s, I feel like looking back now, I didn't have the language or experience to be able to speak up for myself. And there's also that fear of doing so. So I think what was so amazing about, yes,
lose.
yes.
Speak up.
And I think what was so amazing about AOC's speech was that it's definitely empowering a younger generation. I think what was even more amazing was the other women of color within the House of Representatives and Congress that spoke up after her too, that said, I've been dealing with this my whole time. And that also just like educating people on like where the word bitch came from, and that it came from during the time when the suffragettes were trying to get women the right to vote, which we mark the anniversary in a few weeks. It's the 100-year ratification of the 19th Amendment. So
I was very moved by it. I think regardless, you know, even if you don't agree with her views, I think it's very short-sighted to not respect that, to not acknowledge that it was a real brave speech for her to be, you know, even the age she is, and to have the confidence. I think a lot of us, you know, I wish, you know, I wish, there's definitely been times where I wish I could have spoken out like her. Mm-hmm. So I love that she did that, you know, even for me, my friends that have little girls, you know, just for them to see this, I think was very powerful.
And I think the other part of it too is like the way I feel like she educated men.
Yes.
And that you can't use your title as husband or father to talk that way about women, that she confronted power in her statement, that sorry, I can hear a bunch of stuff going on and I'm trying to, so that she responded with such grace and dignity to someone who didn't deserve that. I think this always goes back to the conversation that women always need to reach higher, that women always need to watch their tone, that they always need to be very civil in this. And that's the part that's really hard. When I know when I watched it, I was like screaming and cheering for her, but I was also so angry.
Yeah. No, it was very moving, very, very powerful. I don't know if you want to bring up the slide of the Goat Girls work.
So I'm just going to share a few images and sure.
So this kind of goes, what we were just discussing, what box are you, even in the senses we don't know what to fill. What shade are you? I'll let you talk about the work a little bit and
Sure.
Yeah.
GOAT stands for greatest of all times. It was an acronym I saw a lot when we were celebrating such like amazing female athletes like Serena Williams and Simone Biles, that I wanted to make these kind of porcelain ribbons to celebrate like the diversity of women and the many shades that we exist in and how beautiful the colors of our skin are, especially when we are inundated with images of beauty that promote that fair skin, that lightness is the most desirable place to be, and that I wanted ribbons. So these ribbons, like I know a lot of people talk about, they remind them of like show ribbons, the ribbons that horses are pinned, that first, second, and third place ribbons. And there's part of that is into this work, and that many young girls love horses, and I, as someone who grew up in a city, I don't know why I loved horses so much. I wasn't around them, but a lot of young girls love horses because in our dreams and our hopes that they kind of exist as these animals that allow us to ride into other worlds. And I thought there was something really magical about that idea. So Goat Girls is made out of colored porcelains that I buy from Laguna Clay. It's a clay manufacturing company here in the United States. That these are made for porcelain dolls, that they are primarily sold for maybe hobbyists and people who make collectible porcelain dolls. That I remember growing up, I really wanted a porcelain doll, but they were all white. That there was never a porcelain doll that looked like me, or even many dolls that look like me of people who are mixed or half. And it's really interesting to learn about the categorization of these colors. That I remember when I was in school and first buying these, that, the color for Asian used to be called Oriental, and the color for African American used to be called Cameroon. And that this is something like even the ceramic industry, or where we get our materials from, are starting to change. But there's still a lot more to do, because also like the color for Asian, it's not like a single color, that we also exist in many different shades. But also fully acknowledging too that even growing up Chinese, of growing up like dark Chinese too, that shadeism and colorism exists within our different races and ethnicities. So Go Girls is really about celebrating the diversity within us.
I love that. I think you mentioned that there was a little girl that came to the exhibition that was looking for her swatch.
Yeah, so this piece was up at Women in Their Work in Austin, Texas, and it was really an exhibition about celebrating the transitions from girlhood to womanhood, and how so much of those experiences are forced upon us at a very early age, and that so much of it too, as we navigate womanhood, it's a whole other set of circumstances we have to be aware of. And I loved like seeing the messages from young girls coming and standing by it and trying to find themselves. And that I really love the conversations that parents are having with their young children about what it means to be half. And I call myself mixed, but like I also think other people have called me mixed, and this is something like I lovingly call myself. So I also need to make that stipulation. But when you're half, there's no dolls that look like you.
Yeah, you can't, was it American Girl dolls? You can get the make your own doll, but I think until recently they had to add more, they did add, more colors, because people were saying, well, so my daughter can only make a doll that has blonde hair and blue eyes. What if she is a darker Latina or Black, or half Asian? Very, very interesting. this work speaks a lot to me. And I love that that little girl found herself in it and was able to feel like, oh, look, I'm up on a wall. Like my color is important. My color is mine. It doesn't need to fit on one swatch or one doll.
I think too, these conversations are happening in the beauty industry too. Like if you ever go into the grocery store and you want to find your shade, like you can see how the beauty industry really limits the amount of shades because it costs more for them to make it, but you're also limiting the audience of women who also want access to this too.
Same with skincare options. I know there's been a lot of, and hair care options. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, the next work we were going to discuss, Don't Play Nice and Shrill, are also two of my favorites. This kind of goes back into, you know, what we're teaching our little girls, what we're teaching our nieces, what we're teaching also little boys when we use certain language, you know, like maybe AOC, I'm sure, you know, all of us growing up were told, just play nice, you know, don't act so shrill, like don't take it personally. That's just the way things are. I don't know if you could speak a little bit into the language that you used in creating these and especially on Shrill, some of the images that you painted on there of womanhood.
So when I put these two images together last night, it really came to me how Don't Play Nice is about girlhood and Shrill is about womanhood. But in Don't Play Nice, it's a slip cast and altered porcelain teacup made to look like a tiny megaphone. And thinking about those times as a little girl where we sat down and played, and we played tea set. I played tea set, and I don't even know where I got it from. It was probably like a TV show or something, but that was like this, what like good quiet girls did, that we sat there and we played nice. And then I often wondered, why wasn't I taught as a young girl just to shout, scream, and express myself fully and completely? And I think those lessons were really instilled in me at a very young age. But also growing up Chinese, there's a whole other set too. And I think like a lot of people who grew up in really culturally rich households, how growing up as a Chinese daughter, I was supposed to be very dutiful, subservient, obviously respect your elders and your community, but I was taught at a very early age, like you get married, you have children, you
maybe become a doctor.
Yes, and become a doctor, you know,
or a lawyer.
All of it, yes. And I really wanted to make these little tea sets to talk about how we can amplify the voices of young girls. In Shrill, it's a glass megaphone with two porcelain cups kind of shoved in there to muffle or stifle the screams coming from it. And I often hear this too as someone with like a perpetually young voice, that I sound very inexperienced, or I sound
like a little girl.
Yeah, it's like a little girl, and I don't know what and so I feel like people don't take me seriously, but also I should be watching my tone. And that has come many times in faculty meetings where I've talked too much, or I need to temper my tone to be able to be heard more. So on these cups are imageries of uteruses, of how uteruses have become like, it's the female reproductive organ that I see plastered on everything now, which is so wonderful to see that, but how even that organ is a mystery too. Venus of Willendorf as like almost the symbol of female empowerment and love and acceptance of our bodies, and ribbons to commemorate and celebrate different causes.
To me, I love, you know, I do have to mention that those who don't know of Jennifer's work, that you primarily specialize in ceramics and you use a lot of porcelain. And I forget where I read this quote, but that you said that you love the idea of that, you know, everyone thinks of porcelain as very fragile, that it's very easy to break. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of how everyone, you know, this idea that women are fragile, that we're easily broken. I think maybe because, you know, growing up, we were told to be quiet, you know, we're fragile, you're supposed to have a baby, you're supposed to be quiet, you're supposed to maybe be a lawyer, don't say anything too too loud, don't babble, stay in the shadows maybe. You're the porcelain expert, but I really love that message that women aren't as easily broken.
So my practice is primarily rooted in porcelain. I am deeply interested in the history of porcelain, how it was first discovered in China over 2,000 years ago. And that if you think about the history of it, that when it was first discovered, there was this like desire for its whiteness. They thought it was a special magic material, that there's hundreds of years of stories of how scientists and alchemists were kidnapped and held in ivory towers to force to develop the recipe for this, when really it came from the earth. That it wasn't only till a few hundred years later that Europe discovered porcelain. So I think that has a very long history, that porcelain traveled the world, that it's traveled the world, and that's why I think we see it as fragile, because we also see objects that are elevated or high class are made from it, like very fine teacups or chinaware sets, when it's traveled the world and it essentially has been unbreakable many times. But we live with porcelain every day. Our toilet is made from porcelain. Like, if you think about the fancy teacup that's protected in that china cabinet that you're never allowed to open, that you sit on a toilet every day. Yeah. And so there's something I love about the dichotomy of that, as something is that we bring out in terms of like impressing someone, to something that we have privilege to have every day for sanitation purposes. That I want to stop like talking about how porcelain is fragile and precious, and that it is and those objects are dainty because they're made that way. But as a material, porcelain has traveled the world, that it's really quite resilient, that there's a lot of power in this material. And I'm interested in using those as also metaphors for how we talk about the strength of women.
I love that. The next work that we have, Formation, in the slides, I'd love for you to also go into a little bit. You've been awarded some residencies and fellowships where you were actually traveled to China, to the origin of porcelain, worked at porcelain factories, porcelain factories, and your experience with, I think there was an experience where you spoke to a man, kind of assuming he was in charge of the porcelain factory, and it ended up being, the woman, and the liberties that you were kind of granted to use the material, but also use the material in a way where right now might not be so accepted, maybe in the Communist Party in China right now. People might think you're making fun or something of an icon of sorts.
So I feel really fortunate that I'm able to travel back to Jindijin. I've been 4 times, and it's a city, it's the porcelain city. Things are still made traditionally very much the same way. It's the same patterns, same blue and white patterns, that not a lot have changed, but what has happened more is more artists are traveling there. And that when artists come into the city, where in China, artists learn how to technically be really skilled, where they live in a society and government where they aren't necessarily allowed to have their own voice. There's not really a strong push for freedom of expression. So I feel like when I go, because my family is from Guangzhou, they came to the United States in the 70s. Guangzhou was a major export city for porcelain. So I feel like in some ways it's like in my DNA, this idea of working within this porcelain city. That I'm not the first artist to use Mao. I'm not the last. Andy Warhol's Mao is extremely famous. And I remember when my mom first saw that, she laughed hysterically at it, and that she thought, you're not allowed to do that, but she thought it was so funny. And so Jindijin makes a lot of Mao sculptures that they primarily travel to the United States for expats that not many people in China have it, but you still see his image in households. Mao is the communist leader of China. He's credited to opening the East up to the West, but he's also responsible for the genocide for millions of people in China. He's also considered a continued architect of the one-child policy, which only allows one child per household in China, which has led to a giant population shift where there are more boys than young girls. So one thing I wanted to do was to take his iconic image and take his power away and turn him into the young girls that he's so afraid of. And so this is where formation comes about. It's made from, I found a small bust of Mao that was found in like an abandoned factory in a desk drawer. That it's a Mao statue from the 70s. So I think it's closely related to a Mao sculpture that would have been found in my mother's and my grandmother's household. And when I was making work and putting all these different hairstyles on him, I met a hair dealer. And
I'd never heard of hair dealers until quite recently.
When we go to the store and we see those packages of long hair or wigs human hair wigs that we see, we are so detached that actually came from someone's body. That this hair dealer rides around the city of Jindijin, which is about 3 million people, with his megaphone saying, asking to buy hair, and that he'll buy it from you, and you can either get one of those stainless steel pots on the back of his bike, or he'll give you cash. That him and his brother ride around collecting hair, and that I was fortunate enough that he let me come to his house, and here the wives were in charge of bundling, washing it, and like categorizing it. And so I was sitting in their house and they just kept dumping bundles and bundles of hair. And this is where you see like the commodification of an extension of the women's body, that women's bodies have been commodified all over the world. And it made me really examine like the hair industry and the beauty industry, really, this multi-million-dollar industry, and that when we look in the United States, like African American women propel the hair industry, but based off of white standards of beauty, from hair that comes from the poorest of women in Asian countries. So this was part of like the cycle I wanted to have a conversation about. But even in Jindijin, like it was harder for the hair dealer to find pure hair, or like what we see on labels as virgin hair, undyed, unprocessed, because many Chinese girls are bleaching their hair to be lighter, be blonde, which makes it less valuable at market. But there's also something about hair I find so interesting, is that in some ways it's so easily ready, we can change it so easily that we can kind of manufacture our identity in this way, that Chinese hair holds its value at market because of its thickness and its strength. It's all DNA and genetics, but it can withstand many different chemical processes. It can be bleached, curled, crimped to mimic other textures. So I've kind of been learning a lot about hair industry through this process.
So interesting. Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything in your background that is a little loud.
It's not me.
Okay.
So I was wondering too. I think someone might have they need to mute.
Yeah, sorry to anyone in the background that can't, or on the Zoom that can't hear us. We're not sure what the background noise is, but we're going to try to speak up. We're going to continue, but I also wanted to mention that if anybody has any questions for Jennifer, to go ahead and type them in the Q&A, and shortly we will be discussing those questions. So get your questions ready, I hope. Oh, I think the background sounds a little better. Not sure what just happened, but I can hear a little better.
Oh, the joys of this digital outreach.
Yes. Hi, we're lucky that we're able to, even virtually see each other, during this pandemic. I also love how on the Mao pieces, you don't have to go back to the slide or anything. You can actually move the little pieces. Mm-hmm. It kind of felt like a chessboard to me in a way. In a way. The next slide that we have is also one of my favorites. It's called Enter the Dragon. I love, the porcelain nunchucks, Bruce Lee, this, icon that you grew up with. I mean, I think everyone remembers who Bruce Lee's was. But what's very interesting is that the martial arts form that he created actually came from a martial arts form that was created by a nun in China to help women with the unwanted advances of men.
Mm-hmm.
If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, growing up, we always watched Bruce Lee movies, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and Jet Li movies. I think it was there's so much power in watching these movies that there's some ways their bodies defied what was humanly possible and how they would fight and fly through the air. And I think I was so deeply invested in Chinese culture and martial arts because of Bruce Lee. And that also just seeing someone that kind of looked like me on screen. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I wanted to learn martial arts just as a form of protection. But learning about Bruce Lee's adapted method it's called Wing Chun, was based off of a female form of martial arts started by nuns centuries ago. And it was taught to other women to stop the unwanted advances of men. And to me, it's interesting how we lost that information once it hit mainstream, and that women have been protecting themselves for centuries, and that this is information that only gets passed down from mother to daughter, auntie to niece, and cousin to cousin or sister to sister. And I thought that was really important. So in this piece, Enter the Dragon, there's these porcelain nunchucks. I think if you've ever watched any Bruce Lee videos on YouTube, you watch how he so effortlessly can swing nunchucks around. That these are made from porcelain. They're still pretty heavy. I feel like they would still hurt someone if you use them. They are decorated with these commercial decals that I bought in Jindajin on my trip 2 years ago. I feel like I found the Lisa Frank of Chinese decals. They're neon and bright, and I felt like it celebrated a nostalgia from the 80s, and especially of my childhood. That it lives on this stand with this gold mirror that you can slightly see your reflection on. And I thought that was also an homage to the Bruce Lee movie where he's fighting within a mirror and he gets confused and he can't see himself. So I wanted to really honor the nun that taught martial arts to women to protect ourselves.
And the way we communicate, like you said, mother to daughter, even friend to friend, every day when we're, just in case this ever happens to you with this person, just so you know, this happened to me, a little bit of the, the stories we share, even going into the Me Too movement of, you're not alone, this happened to me too.
Mm-hmm.
Women have been protecting each other in some way by passing down stories and to protect the next generation.
Yeah, and I think about this too, that these are all with the Me Too movement, they're all really difficult stories to share. And I think we also shouldn't feel obligated to publicly share them. But I feel women are so wonderful at confiding in one another and helping each other get through these times, and how to kind of navigate this world with these experiences that are almost secret in some way. And it's all really hard to know what line to walk or navigate within that.
Definitely. The next slide, sisters doing it for themselves. The two sisters, the purse that is a cement brick. Tell us a little bit about this, because I think it goes into the past slide that we were just talking about. Sad.
So in these pieces, they're porcelain bricks with attachments to turn them into purses, but they can easily be unattached and flung and used as a weapon. I was really...
Flung one?
I have not, but I have dropped it a few times, and they're pretty heavy, and they're still intact. That this piece was really about me reflecting upon living in the state of Texas. I teach at a public university that, because of our gun laws, students can conceal carry a gun on campus. That I was worried that was going to affect how I teach. I kind of don't think about it so much anymore, but I then worry about why I don't think about that anymore. But I also want to learn more about this. Like, I don't own a gun. I don't want guns. Don't like guns. I think we need more gun control laws, but I want to understand why people want guns. And so many people I talked to said just having one, the weight of it against their hip on a holster, or like on a shoulder holster, how it made them feel safe. And so I thought about that weight. And at the same time, I was having conversations with older women in my community about their forms of protection. And a lot of times I heard they would put bricks in their purses when they were walking at night, or when they were leaving church, or if they were walking to a bus stop late at night, that brick in that purse was that same weight. And so these are my versions of this. They're purses made by, I take old doilies, old handkerchiefs, and I have like a collection of old t-shirts from boyfriends, or I also get all these things from my friends, and that I dip them in the porcelain clay so that the cotton material gets soaked with it. I pack them into molds, and then I fire them. Okay. So all those organic materials burn away, but the imprint of them, so up close you can see in the bricks, they're layered. They're strata of like the lacy ends and the crocheted doilies. And so a lot of these materials had like emotional weight, that it became something too. It was like this idea that this emotional weight can also be my burden, but also my protection.
Beautiful. I love that. Love that. On to this next slide, which is just a beautiful installation image. You can see the goat girls here in the background. And then we have the babe cave that you'll talk about shortly, with the hair. I think it's acrylic hair?
Yes.
Acrylic hair. I love the chip clip that is opening the cave. I have one right here. And the porcelain table and chairs. If you could tell us a little bit more about this piece too.
So Babe Cave was like kind of my reaction to Man Cave or She Sheds, and thinking about gendered spaces. I think the Man Cave really gets to me because why do men need dedicated spaces within their own home for them to be men? And that, I felt like in some ways was saying that the home or the house was an overall female space. Mm-hmm. And why is it then we're in charge of the maintenance, upkeep, and care of it? And so Babe Cave was my reaction to that. It is suspended from the ceiling. It's made from a circle that holds a ring of fake hair adorned with beads, and then cheerleader pom-poms at the top, that it becomes a protective, almost tent for people to come into and like have honest conversations across the table. It's made from fake hair. I've been working with a factory in China to purchase fake hair, that this hair goes to wig and weave manufacturers, and also this hair goes to doll industry to make doll hair. That I work a lot with the idea of blue and white. Blue and white cobalt patterns and decorations is something that I learned a lot about in Jindajin, that blue and white willowware, the iconic pattern of found on plates that consist of pagoda, 3 people fishing, 2 birds on the top, and a certain block pattern, is the most appropriated pattern in the world with no known true origin of it, but we attribute it to China. That blue and white talks a lot about global migrations of information. And so that's what this blue is symbolic of. That adorned on the part of this are beads. And so when you walk around the outside of it, it gives you a little bit of spacing to kind of peer into to see what's inside the space. Adorned on the beads are affirmations I got from Instagram and from people in my community that kind of help keep us going, that say like, girl, you can, one potato at a time, you can do this. And so when you walk around this, then you see the part. And I love like the part of the curtain, which is like the part of the hair that is held back with clips. And inside you come to a porcelain blue and white table. So this blue and white table was made on a trip to Jindajin that I went to a table factory. And when I say factory, and I think when a lot of people say factory, in Jindajin, it's families. It's a family-owned business that makes these objects, that the factory exists within their home, like the front up part of their home. This is how the labor was segregated. The husbands would throw on a potter's wheel the tabletop and base, and then the wives would do the decorating. And I spent 3 days in their factory painting a table that was, and I see these tables all over China, and I absolutely fell in love with it. My husband and I spent 3 days painting chihuahuas in blue and white on a table, and that lives in our backyard. And it wasn't till later on I thought I would love to make one of these for my work. And so on this table, you come to it. You feel like you're not allowed to sit on it because I think that's once again people trying to navigate their perceptions of porcelain being dainty and fragile when this is very strong. I've seen young children jump on this table. It's still there. I've seen it in winter and totally fine. Yeah.
Touched.
Yes. That I think letting go of the traditional patterns we always see on these tables. There's once again the symbol of the uterus. And even when I was painting it, their young children kept coming and looking at it, then looking at me, looking at it, looking at me. So there's a part where there's a language barrier, but there's also trying to educate like the symbolism that are seen in these pieces. I love the symbolism of the peach in it's seen a lot as iconography in Chinese art, and that the peach is a symbol of longevity, but I also think it's a symbol of sexuality and sensualness. And that cut peach for me was a way of seeing it as you're kind of half ripe, that as we age, women become more invisible, that in some ways we all kind of maybe shrivel up and we're not as plump or luscious as a full peach anymore. I think juicy is a really good word there. Venus of Willendorf, and how I love that I see a lot of people using her as a symbol of body acceptance, and that she was most likely a fertility figurine made for other women. And then my favorite image of the chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum is one of the few flowers that survives the first frost of the season. And I love how hardy that is. And I feel like that was a really beautiful metaphor for what women go through. Across the table are some of my favorite expressions or sayings that I've ever received from people. And there will be pain of like not sugarcoating these experiences, to let go of preciousness, whatever that means to you. Girl, you can, and that truth before flowers, that please give me the real honesty before you give me the beauty in this. And so when this table was up, I so loved like the stories women in their work would send me, and that they would see young girls having a full-blown doll party on the table, and that some people would go and sit there by themselves and just contemplate the space.
And that was like generational too, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that women brought their daughters, and it became a really peaceful gathering space in the gallery.
Really quick, we have a question from Lan Lin. I think Sarah is going to Hi, Landlin. I don't know if she can, I think the audio is turned off right now, but we should be getting her shortly. We're all learning as we go along. Oh, hi.
Hello.
So this is the first time, one of the first times I think we're trying this out. So go ahead and welcome.
Okay, I just wonder where Jennifer got this table.
I got it in Jindajin, China.
In China?
Yeah, and then so one thing I love about this table was I see these stools made. I think like Pier 1 has these stools too sometimes. But I worked with the family that owned this table factory. They let me stay there for 3 days and paint it. And then I shipped it home in a giant 1 cubic foot crate. So this table, to have it painted and made, was maybe like $200 US, but it was way more expensive to ship here.
It's so it's in Guangzhou?
Jindajin, which is in the Jiangxi province, just outside, outside of Guangzhou and Shanghai. Yeah, I think right now they have a major, it's typhoon season. So the images of Jindajin right now is like, a lot of it is like flooded.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for information. It's very beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I like the words on the, side. It's like very unique. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, happy to answer. I'm not sure if we got one. We have Dennis is saying, I've enjoyed seeing your COVID looks, Jennifer, hats and coverings that you share on social media. Are you considering incorporating these into future works?
So thank you, Dennis. I have thoroughly enjoyed your COVID looks as well. And I think that was something I started off buying just for a form of personal protection when I go back to the classroom at the end.
For those that don't know, Jennifer is also a professor at a university here in Texas, and she is going to be going back to teaching in so far a modified setting, modified in-person setting is I think what we're calling it right now. So for those that don't follow Jennifer, she has been showing all of her protection gear. Sorry, now continue.
Yeah, and so I think my favorite form of protection gear I've gotten so far is like this very prairie handmaid's tale bonnet that is with a little visor and plastic shield, and it comes with a bow tie, and it's almost cape-ish. And I bought this as just a form of protection for when school starts, but I think I buy a lot of really random things from eBay that are made in China, which a lot of things are lost in translation in terms of quality in these purchases. But I realized too, I buy a lot of things like this when I was in China, and that I absolutely love, like the face bikinis that are look like Nacho Libre masks, but you wear them to protect your face from the sun, to eyelid enhancers, which are glasses that help you form a double eyelid. That there is a whole form of beauty industry in terms of like how to alter or change your Asian identity and your features. But definitely I started thinking about how I can incorporate these into like performance-based pieces. And even how I said I don't want to make work specifically about COVID, I feel like now I am. And that in some ways too, my practice has always addressed like capitalism in terms of like the beauty industry and hair, of like Asian labor, and like how we equate Asian labor as cheap, so that but how much of what we consume every day comes from this cheap labor, without care or concern to the physical bodies doing it. But there is this whole idea of COVID capitalism now, where it's been interesting to see like every small business making masks. but also how so many women have been arming themselves with their sewing machines at home and making masks for people, that it's the labor of women that are also getting us through this.
Back to the, COVID capitalism that you were just kind of talking about, it's really interesting to know, we were saying the word factory, but many of these factories are really family-run businesses, small businesses that are, from the home, as you were saying. That's really interesting to know, because I think we get this idea that, these porcelain, items that we might be buying from Pier 1, as you said, are created in some huge factory somewhere in China. They kind of lose face in a way when we don't really realize some of these are really just, family-run businesses from the home that really have a face, an actual personal story behind them.
Oh yeah, and like every ceramic object, like if you go to Target or Walmart and you see like a cup with like a saying on it that says like, I hate Mondays, like physical hands have to touch that. We think it's automated or made in a factory, but on one trip,
do that yet.
on one trip to China, our group got access to go to a Sanrio factory that makes
Hello Kitty.
Yeah, I forgot it was like one of the other friends. It wasn't Hello Kitty, but it was for Shanghai Disney.
Okay.
But it was a Japanese company employing this porcelain factory in China to make these like commemorative plates. And first it struck me, we weren't allowed to take pictures, that how many hands were in the process, that someone who made the teapot spout to the handle to the cup each had a different color they had to mark on it to show that it was their job to do this one piece. So if there was a flaw in it, you knew which person to call out.
Wow.
And it was interesting, like we as a group immediately asked like, what are the working conditions? And the Chinese factory owner said, Americans always ask about the working conditions, whereas the Asian owners always ask how much did they get done?
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really interesting conversation, but it's not a clean factory floor that you think. And like when we see images of the Amazon warehouses and how there's still bodies that need to do that work.
Yeah, there's still people packing and, especially right now, risking their lives to pack the protection equipment that you might be wearing in school to protect yourself. There's an actual face and person behind all of this. We have some questions. Amanda's asking, I love the multidisciplinary aspect of your work. I'm wondering how you make the decision to make a piece more installation-based, photographic, or sculptural. What happens in your creative process that helps you make those decisions?
Ooh, really good question. So I feel like I came to this later in my practice. Like I trained traditionally in ceramics, and these were conversations like in school we were trained to be an object maker. And I felt like this idea of making something in ceramics or porcelain and putting it on a pedestal didn't speak to my ideas, that it really limited the story I could tell. So then I started wanting to, how do I talk about eyebrows and eyebrow tattooing and how eyebrows are such a part of like Asian women's beauty standards, and like this idea of taking the beauty of eyebrows and plucking them from a blue and white pot and just putting it on a pedestal, to me really limited the story. So that was kind of the first like performance-based piece I did, where I adorned my hairless eyebrows with blue and white porcelain eyebrows. And I felt like too, as making work about identity, which I feel like I had to use myself in this. I couldn't task that or place that onto someone else. That I felt like I was learning a lot about myself too. Like I get really uncomfortable doing these performance-based pieces, that I think what I pick and how I choose to like display the piece, or what is the overall end result of the piece, is based on kind of the story I want to tell. I feel like larger base installations became something, they're still kind of scary because I don't have my studio space is like a 1-car garage. It's really small and I work on one tiny table and I have one kiln that I often don't see them until they're fully realized in a space. But I'm really thankful for spaces that have taken a chance on me to allow me to do that. That I wanted to do these installations because I want people to also get a sense that it's taking the idea of the preciousness and delicateness that we perceive porcelain and making it bigger. So you are then confronted with your whole body in it.
I'm going to try to get to everyone's questions. We only have about 5 minutes or so left. Jennifer, thanks for the excellent conversation. Can you talk about what it's like to work with the porcelain makers in China in terms of them producing utilitarian materials and you making objects for your art practice? What are the conversations, sorry, 1 second. What are their conversations about their work like?
So what I love about Jindajian is that they're dedicated masters. There's like one master mold maker, one master painter, that their labor is segregated through the process. You don't work with someone that does it all. A lot of times, one thing, like when I meet these artisans and craftspeople, the first thing they ask is like, what are you? It's the same question I get here in the United States, but I hear it in Chinese, like her eyes look Chinese, but her nose isn't. And so it's a lot of times of me like talking about my family story and where my family's from. And I feel like there's a common bond there that I kind of appreciate. And a lot of times they do this. They see like it's the United States and China coming together in like my being. That I want to work with these artisans and craftspeople because they are so good at what they do. It also provides them a living outside, especially since a lot of factory work in China is slowing down in terms of production. A lot of times they don't understand what I'm doing. I think they think it's funny, like the mouths with the hair. Half the people thought I was allowed to do it and half said I could because I was American. And those are interesting conversations. And I think within my last 2 trips there, I've been really trying to document and take pictures and write the oral stories and histories of those craftspeople because they are slowly dying and no longer there. And so it was like honoring their livelihoods and their contributions to like the ceramic industry.
Are they passing down, just curious, are they passing down their trade to other generations, or have their, because I mean, I know that's an issue around the world where, you know, your parents were in the ceramic industry, so that's what you did. You know, it was this cycle, but you know, sometimes now people want to be a DJ. I don't know, like, so.
That's a really interesting conversation. And just from like my experience and traveling throughout China and even the small villages is that there is a large population of older people and then young babies. That middle generation have all left the small villages to go work in bigger cities, and then they send the money home. And I see that a lot in Jindajian too, is that now part of the economy is like the artists coming there, which Ai Weiwei so famously made his sunflower seeds. He has a studio there. And that when he employed like the whole city of Jindajian to make those millions of sunflower seeds, what it did was he paid them like a much better salary than they were making in the factory. So then it raised the income, like costs they were asking, which is a really good thing. So I think it's how many people want to sit and make molds in a really wet, dirty plaster studio all day. And it's also really a lost skill because mold making is really hard.
We have someone else who's asking, well, she was recently, or they love following you on Instagram and they love your work. She found herself, she says she's a white lady in a situation recently on an artist panel where a biracial Chinese white artist's work was questioned by a Chinese artist who was a fellow panelist on not being Chinese enough to speak to those works. And the biracial artist was born in the States. Do you ever encounter things like this? If you have, how, if at all? what would you like your white allies to respond in a situation like this?
Oh, that's a really great question. And thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's something I get all the time. But I even get that within my own family. Like my Chinese family thinks I'm too white to participate in a lot of things. And that even my Chinese cousins who I grew up with from like being very small don't always consider me fully Chinese. So I feel like in terms of my work, I can only speak to what I have devoted my research to, and that's the history of porcelain. I also feel like my bio, my whole life story is like for the forefront of every conversation, that I have to spell out like this is where I'm coming from and these are my experiences. Sometimes I wish I don't have to do that. Like I feel like I have to publicly put so much out there so that you can understand where my work is coming from. And I feel like it's my bio that has to like become the qualifier for others to believe me. But I also am partly an academic. So like, I hope that like my research stands for something. Like I'm not cherry picking what I want to make work from. That I also don't have the privilege of like going into the studio and just like intuitively grabbing things and making. Like it comes from like months of planning and research. And that I hope too there's more open conversations instead of saying you're not allowed to do that or what makes you Chinese enough to do that. That I think our experiences aren't monolithic and that there's a lot of nuance, diversity within these experiences. And I would hope there's more openness for conversation. But
I don't know if the panelists or if this situation arise with a woman artist or a male artist, but I do have to say, I do think women artists do get questioned more often. Like it's easier to, for some reason, you know, everyone assumes that, oh, she's a female artist, she probably didn't do her homework.
Yeah, I think it's really, that's a really hard question. And I find myself navigating it more, but it wasn't until like within the past like 2 years I've gotten invited to like all Asian exhibitions because and even still, I feel like when I enter that group, like I can always tell I'm the only one with like an Anglo-Germanic last name where everyone else has Asian names. But I am so appreciative of organizations and institutions that want to include like my story within these Asian voices.
And I think it's wonderful. It's an anonymous person who posted this, but I think even just starting the conversation of, as an ally, how would you like me to respond to this? Like, how can I help you when I am encountered by something that you aren't there to answer for?
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think is so thank you to whoever asked that. I think we have time for one more question. I guess this, you know, maybe it kind of brings it full circle to the beginning. Or maybe we've, you know, but obviously COVID has affected everyone consciously or unconsciously. How have you struggled with the negative aspects affecting your process or influence in any way?
Oh,
yeah. Sorry. Well, we're done after this one.
Yeah, I know. I kind of feel like let me start like with like no matter like my own personal history or like my intergenerational trauma or like trying to make work about social injustices, like it all feels really heavy, and this became one more heavy thing because I realized so much of my practice is about sitting within community, of like having conversations face to face with people, of being in a physical space where we can like communicate, hug, and express and like have these difficult conversations. So to have it over like a screen has been hard. It doesn't translate well. I miss being in a classroom where we can like have safe spaces to have these conversations. I feel like sometimes on the internet there's a lot of shouting or things get taken out of context. So it wasn't until like maybe like 2 weeks ago where I finally had like this big nesting urge to like clean my studio and organize. A lot of times I would just go in there, stare at it, and be like overwhelmed. But I started organizing my studio, and I forgot like getting my body physically engaged in something a lot. Like I had a good idea for the first time in like months, and it was like a little glimmer of hope. Like I now have to act upon it, which I know is a whole other thing to emotionally engage in and get ready for. But I also just want to know how I can be a better person to my community, like how I can like lift as I climb, like how I can advocate more for my friends who are struggling. Like it's a lot to process, and also to be emotionally there for my students who are all really unsure about why are we making art now? They just graduated, like what resources are there for me to be an artist, and like just to encourage them that like that artists are more important than ever because we serve as like the makers of our visual record, and we need that as part of the world today.
Do you have plans to hopefully go back to China? Obviously,
Yeah.
you know, the pandemic, you know, everything gets under control.
I so miss like my friends there, and like also fully acknowledge, you should know that like my friends have not been able to leave China for years because the regulations to get a visa is so hard for the United States. I was supposed to go this summer, and I'm really sad about that, but also my passport expires in February, and I don't even know if I should renew it because we can't go anywhere. So
yeah, these are all open-ended questions. I mean, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, but
I don't know what to plan for and what to put on hold, but I think we're all just trying our best.
Okay, so I think we're kind of out of time. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Culture Place and the Dallas Art Fair for helping us bring all of this into people's homes or workspaces, wherever you feel safest. Anybody did have questions that we might not be able, that we weren't able to get to, can email the email address on the webinar that you sign up for, and I'm sure that we can figure out how to get your question answered. Thank you for everything, and I hope everyone stays safe, happy, and healthy.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much, and please DM me or email me. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Thank you for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.